The most recent news, the Denver Nuggets have extended Jamal Murray. They've agreed on a 4-year, $209 million maximum contract extension, which will now lead to Murray being under contract for $245 million through 2029. They lock in a core piece there. I know some people went back and forth saying this could be one of the worst contracts in the NBA going forth. Others say it's locked in for the future. Here's the fact of the matter. The Denver Nuggets have won an NBA championship with this core group. Jamal Murray typically does show up. Yeah, last year was a little bit rocky. Yes, the Olympics was atrocious. However, you're not going to let him walk. You're not just going to let him go. Okay, this team is at the situation where the cap space is currently at right now. You're not just going to let core pieces go. He is good enough to win his championship with. Why do I know that? Because it's already happened. And Jamal Murray, I think, will have a better season this year, and you weren't going to let him walk. So that's a good move for the Denver Nuggets at this point in time. All right, so let's actually break down this roster now and what we're looking like as we head into the 2024-2025 NBA season. All right, I have to start off now with the front office and coaching staff group. There has been some rumblings. This is from Zach Lowe. I want to say this quote, okay? There are some rumblings, Zach Lowe said, rumblings that the coaching staff and front office, or at least the head coach in the front office, aren't exactly seeing eye to eye in Denver. To a degree, even unusual for the NBA. All right. What I want to make sure that we remember about this, Calvin Booth is not the one that built the foundation of this team. Yes, he made a couple of good moves when Tim Connelly moved on, but he was not the guy that got the core group found and built out there in Denver. So you could see where there could be rumblings because clearly there is a different philosophy behind Calvin Booth and what was formerly in place in Denver. So that does not mean that I'm not a fan of Calvin Booth, but I could understand that these rumblings could potentially be true. And the reason for that is Calvin Booth has gone in a different philosophy now. You can see in this team. He obviously embraces the youth a lot more. However, I will say this. In today's new cap structure in the NBA, that is typically something you're going to have to look at and do because when you have the structure that's now been put in place in the NBA, your core guys are going to have to be essentially the makeup of your roster. The other pieces will have to be surrounded by young guys and cheap contracts because going over that tax threshold is only capable of being done by a certain couple amount of owners that have immense billions and billions and billions of dollars to the likes of like a Steve Ballmer. But even that, you're going to get massive penalties and disciplines, restrictions to your team by doing so. So what the Denver Nuggets have done is something that you kind of have to do in a sense. But the fact that Calvin Booth seems okay with letting guys like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope move on for nothing, I could see where Michael Malone is a little bit not happy about what's going on because it's going to be tougher to win now. And that's going to be the hole that needs to be filled here. So I want to break down this roster because, this is a team that is still obviously a contending NBA roster. But when I look at the Denver Nuggets, I will be honest. There are a lot of questions surrounding this team right now. Let's start off with the positives. You have the best player in the NBA holding down the fort down low in Nikola Jokic, all right? When you have Jokic there, you're going to be a contender regardless of situation, timing, or whatever the case may be. When Jokic is a part of your roster, you're set. So the Denver Nuggets, of course, are going to be contenders because you have Jokic down low. That's obviously a pro. The best player in the NBA is on your team. Then you head over and you have Aaron Gordon, one of the most valuable interchangeable pieces, one of the best role players you could say in the NBA. He is a guy that's going to be starting at power forward for you. You can't complain about that. Then you head over to what I just discussed a few moments ago, and Jamal Murray is running the point guard spot. There are guys clearly better than Jamal Murray at the point guard spot. However, he is a guy that has won an NBA championship as a starting point guard. So I'm not really worried about him either. MPJ is another guy that, we're starting to get a little shaky here. That is a contract that is a little bit questionable. However, we do know the value that MPJ brings to a team. So I'm not going to bring too much critique to him because he was a critical component to this roster. But here's where the things start to get a little bit interesting and where the question marks begin for Denver. Those 4 guys are locked in. However, that 5th starter where Kentavious Caldwell-Pope previously was is now going to be an open hole for the Denver Nuggets. And I don't know if that starting role is going to be filled and solidified for a few months, to be honest. And quite frankly, this could become a situation, not a good situation, but could be a situation that when we come down to it, we could be looking at the trade deadline and they might still be trying to figure out who exactly fills that void. Right now, I'll just say this. Christian Braun's the guy that, of course, I believe is going to be starting for them. He makes sense. He's going to be able to take that step up and be able to fill that void. However, has he done enough throughout his NBA career where I feel confident in saying that Christian Braun is going to be able to be a starter on this contending roster for the Denver Nuggets right away? Not yet. So therefore, I have to ask myself, well, we see other guys that have a chance. You could throw Peyton Watson in that group. You could have Julian Strawther there. Personally, when I look at the Denver Nuggets, one rotational spot that I see that does interest me a little bit, and I have no idea if it works, but I would like to see if it would work or not, especially if the Christian Braun situation does not work. And that would be, what if you slide Jamal Murray to this 2 and you throw Westbrook in at the 1? All right, because Westbrook was a huge addition to this team. Whether that's going to be as a 6-man or that's going to be as a starter, I love the Russell Westbrook addition. Say what you want about him. He plays hard-nosed defense. He plays his utmost effort. He's a guy that plays winning basketball. I understand he has not won a championship yet, but he plays winning basketball. You're never going to be disappointed when you watch Russell Westbrook play with the effort he brings. We know what he's going to bring to the team, and he doesn't have to be that guy. We were talking about it. You have the best player in the NBA already. Jamal Murray is going to be the second scoring option. MPJ is a guy that can be a scoring threat. Aaron Gordon plays his role, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're Russell Westbrook, he has the ability to score to a certain extent, yes, but he also can facilitate, but he also can be that hard-nosed defensive player. And when I look at this roster, you could throw Russell Westbrook in there at the 1, shift Jamal Murray to the 2. Does it open it up where you have 2 ball handlers and you have Jamal Murray more in a scoring role? I don't mind that. That's why I'm actually intrigued by that. Because you already know, like I said, the offense is already set. Get Jokic the ball. Everything runs through him. Jamal Murray can go penetrate, can go do what he needs to do as well on the offensive end. You have catch and shoot guys and MPJ. Aaron Gordon's going to be your lob threat. You have pretty much the offense already set up. So all you need Westbrook to do is facilitate, play defense, and play his role in that offense. And I think he's more than capable of doing that. So as I said, I'm not going to say this is going to be the set lineup. This is what I'm looking to. But if the Christian Braun scenario does not work out well, I'm not opposed to Russell Westbrook potentially being the starting point guard there, shifting Jamal Murray, then having a lineup of Westbrook, Jamal Murray, MPJ, Aaron Gordon, and Jokic. That is something that does intrigue me. Now, I trust Michael Malone. I think he's one of the top-level coaches in all the NBA. He's phenomenal. I think he's going to give that a shot at some point in time. I think he's going to figure out the best rotation for this team. But when I look at this, that is a situation that does intrigue me a lot there. Regardless, though, if Westbrook is not going to be a starter, then he's going to be solidified as the 6-man for the Denver Nuggets. And that's a role that I love for him. I think he's a guy, like I said, will bring it defensively. If you put him in the 6-man role, he would then have a lot more of a longer leash offensively. He can go penetrate, get to the rim, et cetera, et cetera. So I like Russell Westbrook regardless. I think that was a very underrated pickup that we'll be looking at throughout the season and say, okay, Russell Westbrook found his groove. This is the right team. They got a bargain on that contract. Love that move by Calvin Booth. Let's fill out the rest of this team. And this is where it gets interesting. And my biggest concerns for the Denver Nuggets is right here. It's the bench. When I look at the bench, I'm only looking at 8 deep in terms of guys that I legitimately trust, and a 9th guy that I could see getting spot minutes, but if it comes to the playoffs, I'm not going to trust him very well. And that is a group that, as I said, let's assume Christian Braun is starting at shooting guard. Therefore, Westbrook is your 6-man like it. All right, so then you have 2 guys. I trust Julian Strawther, and I trust Peyton Watson. I think both those guys have either proven themselves to a certain extent where I think they're going to take the next jump, or I think they're in line for a massive breakout season. Both of those guys are guys I think, like I said, could potentially battle for a starting spot on this core group. If not, they're going to be very, very valuable backup guys at the 2, 3, 4, whatever you want to look at there. So I really do like those 2 guys. I think Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, 2 young guys, 2 great draft picks that will contribute majorly to this bench. But this is where the question marks really get going for myself. Obviously, the starting spot at this 2 guard is going to be questionable. But in terms of an actual thing that's going to hinder this roster is at the 9th man and on. Assuming for myself, I look at it, I say Dario Saric is going to be the 9th man on this team. Regular season, fine. He can play. He's a good rotational player. In the postseason, I don't trust him very well. And thankfully, you do have 2 guys that can play 40 minutes or so in the postseason, Jokic and Gordon. But somebody's going to have to play some spot minutes at the 4 and 5. And The 4 and 5 is very, very low on depth. When you talk about the backups for Jokic being DeAndre Jordan and Zeke Nnaji, I'm not comfortable with that at all. Jordan's a great locker room presence. Sure, he can play a couple good minutes here and there. I'm not trusting him in the playoffs, nor am I trusting either one of those guys in the playoffs. Then you go to there. Dario Saric, like I said, yeah, sure, good. I don't want him in the playoffs too many minutes. And then Ken Curry's back, and we haven't seen him really play at a high level yet in his career, but he's back, and he's going to try playing on this rotation again, even though, he's obviously come back a season-ending injury. Then you go Hunter Tyson, another guy that, we've seen flashes. I think he could potentially emerge and be a rotational guy this year. But at this point in time, I'm not going to say I'm comfortable with him being in that role. And then you have Jalen Pickett, another guy that I do like as well. I think he's a guy that you could see take another jump. Didn't get a lot of minutes last year, but in terms of getting spot minutes, I could see him getting, he's going to have to play somewhat. He's going to be able to be a facilitator. I think getting him involved in the team early on would be huge for this roster. He's another guy, him and Hunter Tyson both are young. I could see them take another jump and be rotational guys. But at this moment, I don't trust them fully to be legitimate rotational guys on a contending roster. So that's the problem. And I have to admit now and acknowledge the big man situation would have been solved if De'Ron Holmes didn't get hurt. And that's one of these situations that nobody's going to fully understand the impact of De'Ron getting hurt because we don't have the data beforehand to see, okay, this is what he could have been and the Nuggets would have looked like with De'Ron and what they look like without him. However, not having De'Ron Holmes on this roster will be huge for this team. They were granted the disabled player exception for $1.53 million. It's not really going to get you anything in the NBA right now, especially at this point in free agency. But DeAndre Jordan and Nnaji are not the guys that you want backing up Jokic at this point in the season. De'Ron was a guy that would have held down the 4 at the 4-5. You could have given him 20, 25 minutes, given Jokic and Gordon nights off occasionally. You could have allowed them the opportunity to play a lesser amount of minutes. De'Ron easily would have been the ninth best player on this team and gotten legitimate rotational minutes on a contending team. That's not going to be the case for them anymore, and that's why it's concerning because now, you're pushing the roster count limit. And De'Ron Holmes, yes, you've got the disabled player exception, but he still is going to be on your roster. He still counts towards the 15-man team roster limit. And so there's obviously going to be a situation in Denver now where, someone on this team you could see possibly get traded or cut so that you can open up a roster spot to go get somebody else because they're going to need to find a way to get this depth up. This is obviously a contending team, as I alluded to. They have the best player in the NBA. You have a great coach. You have great surrounding pieces. The starting lineup, regardless of how you're going to build it, is going to be set. It's going to be okay. You also have an 8-man rotation, which is really what you do need at the end of the day for the playoffs. However, this is a long NBA season, and there's a lot of question marks around the bench. There needs to be more depth on this team, particularly at the 4-5. Dario Saric, like I said, will be somebody you can semi-trust in, but they definitely need to add on some bench depth to this Denver Nuggets team. I will allude to this. You have three two-way contracts, and I want to make sure I make this statement clear. Calvin Booth did an incredible job with the two-way spots. I think he had two guys that should have been drafted. He landed as two-way contracts, and that is PJ Hall and Trey Alexander. I like Spencer Jones as well. He can space the floor, shoot the three ball pretty well. I'm not sure how much minutes he's going to get with the main team, but I think Hunter Tyson's more the guy you're going to put over him. Maybe he is, but I do like Spencer Jones as well. However, Trey Alexander and PJ Hall were two guys that should have been drafted this year in the NBA. The fact that they were not drafted was shocking to myself, but I think it worked out for both of them. And I say this because these are two guys that I would not be shocked if we see in the coming weeks and whatnot that these two guys end up playing really, really well in training camp and preseason and potentially get some run early in the season with the main team. And I would not be shocked if either one of these two or both of them end up actually taking a spot of the guys I already talked about on the national depth chart that have guaranteed or partially guaranteed contracts. Because Trey Alexander, to begin with, is a guy that can get a bucket at any time. You could utilize that on this team, especially off the bench. He's a guy that is confident. He has the ability to go get a bucket at will. He's also a guy that can make plays for the team. I like him. I would not be shocked to see him on the main team. But the one that, for the situation and where the biggest red flags are for the Denver Nuggets, PJ Hall is going to be huge for this team. I say this because the bench on this roster, I said, is not very good behind Jokic and Eric Gordon. I can't emphasize that enough. PJ Hall is a guy that has the ability to space the floor to a certain extent. He rebounds hard, has good shot blocking ability. He's a pretty solid defensive player, but overall, he knows how to play his role really, really well and embrace that role. And so I would not be shocked if we get to a point in January or February or March and we see him, maybe even before that he gets an actual contract on the team so that he can play permanently and be part of this rotation. Because I would not be shocked to see him get more minutes and be a more valuable piece to this roster than what they currently have at the center spot. So I want to make sure I alluded to that because that is something that people need to keep an eye on. That's one of the biggest actual things that I'm keeping an eye on for this team is that the two-way spots that Calvin Booth signed, he nailed. I don't think there was a team that did a better job with the two-way contracts than Calvin Booth this year. All three guys are guys that I could see play, particularly Trey Alexander and PJ Hall. So those are two guys to keep an eye on. Regardless, though, if those two guys aren't going to be a part of this roster and be able to contribute this year, especially into the playoffs, which I'm not sure if that would be the case, I think what we need to keep an eye on is do the Denver Nuggets pull a trade off? Because I alluded to, if an injury occurs, this team is pretty much over with. It's to the top level guys, obviously. They need depth, and they need to be able to get that depth however it works out. Because this is not a team that I think was going to be able to sustain the long haul of an NBA season by putting a heavy workload on Jokic and Gordon and MPJ game after game after game because they couldn't get a bench right. So that is something to keep an eye on. I do think they need a trade. However, the Denver Nuggets are a team that's going to be a contender regardless. You have the best player in the NBA. You have a group of guys that surround him and fit his role very well. The entire group of starting five will be set. They have 8 guys that are set. This will be a team that's obviously going to the playoffs. They're going to be a contender, and they're going to be fun to watch. I just have a lot of question marks regarding the bench depth on this roster. If that gets fixed, and whether that's going to be via trade or someone has a breakout season, they're going to be A-okay, and they're obviously going to be one of my top 3, 4, 5 teams, whatever it's going to look like. They're going to be in that top level tier of contenders for me. Right now, I don't even want to say they're out of, because like I said, you have Nikola Jokic. He's going to keep you a contender. I can't not say Denver Nuggets are going to be contenders. I just have a lot of question marks about the bench depth. But regardless, they are obviously a contender. I just don't know if I have them in my top 2, 3, 4 teams or whatnot in the NBA at this point in time. But they certainly are a team that's going to be a massive threat this year and would not even shock me at all if they go and do win the championship this season.